Are Newcastle United really looking to build a new £250 million strike force? In this video we're going to be looking at the news that Hugo Ekitike is a target to play alongside Alexander Isak and decide how feasible that is. Plus, reaction to Anthony Elanga finally arriving at the club and some news on a boardroom restructure. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please do subscribe and hit like on this video if you're new and you haven't already. It really helps, as I always say. Today it's Hugo Ekitike again. We're going to be discussing the news that Newcastle are looking to sign him alongside Alexander Isak, and the idea behind his arrival wouldn't necessarily mean, as has been long reported and speculated, that Newcastle would have to sell their prized Swedish striker. Basically, I'm going to give a rundown as to how I think that's possible, because that is the plan. I spoke to somebody over the weekend who confirmed to me that Newcastle are in fact looking to sign Hugo Ekitike without selling Alexander Isak. As we've mentioned a couple of times now, Newcastle can't go crazy with a bunch of deals at the same time because of the lack of bodies in the boardroom, because Paul Mitchell's not been replaced yet, because Darren Eales is not really as heavily involved as he ordinarily would be, because he's about to leave as well. Newcastle are looking to replace both of them. There is, as I mentioned, a little bit of a boardroom addition to talk about at the end of the video, but basically Newcastle, because of Andy Howe and Steve Nickson having to take negotiations by the scruff of the neck, and Eddie Howe helping out, but having pre-season training to think about and various different things on the football side, Newcastle can only really look at one deal at a time, and they took their time to finally get the Anthony Elanga deal over the line. Now they're moving on to a striker, and basically they've got a bunch of names with various different values and scenarios on their heads to see which one is the best possible option. And I surmised, and I still stick by this, that basically Ekitike would be the ultimate long-term replacement for Alexander Isak. I know that it's emerged over the weekend that Newcastle want to pair them together, but I still think long-term, if you're signing Hugo Ekitike with Alexander Isak's contract in the situation that it is, you've got to have a long-term plan. And the reality is that if you look at the fact that Newcastle bid for João Pedro, went in for João Pedro again, the other striker that Newcastle moved for pre-Isak alongside Ekitike, it would not be ridiculous to suggest that Ekitike tops their list of potential options as a long-term replacement for Isak. In the meantime, though, they want to pair them together. It's just an ability to future-proof. I'm not saying if they signed Ekitike, selling Alexander Isak would be in the plan, but as I mentioned last week, it's just about future-proofing and having different options available to you to react to different situations. And we know that Alexander Isak is going to have contract talks this summer, but Liverpool are circling. Their position will strengthen next summer when he's only got 2 years in his contract remaining, and I think the chances, in my opinion, are he will not sign a new contract and will look to probably move on next summer when Liverpool maybe come back to the table, especially if Newcastle have signed Ekitike in this world, because he is their other alternative as well. But Barcelona may be an option because of their move back to the Camp Nou, see what their financial situation is. They do genuinely have Isak as a potential option as well. But yeah, Newcastle do have a bunch of strikers on their list. Ekitike is on that list because he's been a long-term target up front for quite some time. We know that Newcastle are a club that like to stick to targets and follow them, even if they do move on to maybe react to situations down the line, as they did with João Pedro. And I think that this has got legs in terms of an option for Newcastle. There are obvious reasons why everybody suggests it won't happen, because of the price tag. Eintracht Frankfurt want around 100 million euros, which is his release clause. Will he play every week? How would the partnership work? There's lots of those different things that lots of people, including myself, mean that this is a doubtful thing to happen. And Liverpool fans have been all over social media saying that it can't possibly happen. As soon as Ekitike joins Newcastle, Isak will be off to Liverpool. It's all set in motion like that. Newcastle's recruitment team don't view it like that. They're not getting into those semantics. They are questions to ask. They are things that they have to figure out if it's feasible down the line. But when they're just creating lists of potential options, it's about getting the best possible player. And I think it's very hard to argue that in their mind, Ekitike is the best possible option because he's the player that they first went for as a potential striker option. He's got a very similar profile to Alexander Isak. He's also very versatile. We know Newcastle want a versatile forward. He can play on the left, he can play in behind Isak. So as a partnership with two players who are used to playing up front with other players, in terms of Gyökeres and Anthony Elanga for Sweden for Isak, or Omar Mamouche before he moved to Manchester City at Frankfurt for Ekitike, both can do it. It works. It may well be true that Newcastle can't afford him. It may well be true that he doesn't want to join and play alongside Isak or play second fiddle to Isak. It may make tactical situations difficult, but those are not the questions to ask at the moment. Newcastle are just looking at potential striker options. He's on the list alongside Johan Visser, who we found out last week is valued at around £50 million by Brentford, despite only having a year left on his contract. So I think that the Visser situation is on ice, but he's on the list. Ekitike is also on the list as well, but I would suggest viewing it with a bit of nuance, because I think at this stage it isn't about how Ekitike would fit in. My personal opinion is that he will prove too expensive for what Newcastle need. He won't want to join and play second fiddle to Isak. He won't really fit in tactically to play two up front, and he won't want to play on the left. All of these things I do think are true. Newcastle do have to be realistic about the quality of striker that they are able to recruit this summer because of the Isak situation. All of the things we've discussed I do think have a lot of merit, but at this stage Newcastle's remit is just to find the best possible option, and if Ekitike is possible, and they do clearly have willingness to spend, as I said last week, on the right player, because they bid £50 million for João Pedro. Of course, Ekitike would be another 30 million at least on top of that at this stage, and there's Chelsea and Manchester United and Liverpool who've also been interested as well. But what we're seeing with Newcastle is yet again this desire to find the best possible option. If you look at Dean Howson, if you look at Michael Elise, if you look at Mark Gahey, if you look at Brian Mbeumo, they've been at the table for certain players they deem are good enough, even though they maybe don't quite fit the business model or the financial situation that Newcastle are in, but they do try and do the deal anyway to see, because the player is deemed good enough, and I think Ekitike certainly falls into that category. So while I don't think this will happen, I don't think Newcastle will be able to sign Ekitike to play alongside Alexander Isak. I absolutely 100% think that it's on the agenda for Newcastle in terms of something that they want to pursue if the right deal comes along. They'll ask the question, I'm sure, of Eintracht Frankfurt. They'll ask the question of Hugo Ekitike. There's been contact between the agents, I'm pretty sure, over the last 3 years. They don't really tend to lose that contact once they've built it up. And Ekitike, there was something really interesting that Ekitike said while he was at PSG, which is when he didn't move to Newcastle in that January of 2022. He said that he would have moved to Newcastle if he'd moved abroad. He had to go to PSG because PSG is the club that most French players want to join, and that's a massive opportunity to play with Neymar, Mbappe and Lionel Messi at the time. From a practical football perspective, to play every week at Newcastle or play more games at Newcastle to aid your development, and the move to PSG certainly did have an adverse effect on Ekitike's development. The fact that he said that, he kept what Newcastle did and all the work they put in to try and get him, and that didn't mean nothing to him, I think maybe can be used. And as I say, there's been contact with the agent over the last 3 years. Let's see how this plays out. I don't see how it will work. I don't see practically how they'll afford him, but Newcastle did want to sign João Pedro alongside Anthony Elanga and James Trafford in that £130 million triple deal. So there is money to a certain degree available to go and try and sign Ekitike. Obviously it'll cost a lot more. Obviously there might be the situation where Newcastle, some people in the comment section last week said that Anthony Gordon should be sold. There was quite a shift, by the way, I will say this, from the video that I did on maybe selling Anthony Gordon to the Ekitike video in terms of the attitude towards selling Gordon. If Newcastle can get Ekitike in, does that mean that selling Gordon is a more palatable thing? To me, I don't even necessarily think it is about a partnership. I think it's about getting a squad together and the best possible options in that squad. Eddie Howe doesn't want a first 11 and then another 7 or 8 substitutes. He wants a squad of 18 to 20 players who are capable of coming in and playing every week when they're required. And in the dream world for Newcastle, signing Ekitike alongside Alexander Isak would be brilliant, because it's two fantastic strikers. There wouldn't be so much of a drop-off if Alexander Isak wasn't there. Also, Ekitike is a long-term replacement if and when Isak does eventually leave. So there's so many reasons why Newcastle would be interested in a move for Ekitike. All of the things about his situation and the fact that he wouldn't play, or the fact that he would play alongside Isak, would that impact the tactics? All of about the cost. Lots of people just automatically rule it out because it doesn't make linear sense in terms of, we know what Newcastle's budget is. Do they have enough money to spend on Ekitike, a goalkeeper and a centre-back? Probably not. As I said last week, Newcastle have got so many different options, so many different plans for different scenarios, and basically if Ekitike becomes available, I'm pretty sure they'll do that deal. As we've seen with Newcastle in previous deals, they look at players as ideal fits and then think of ways to fit them in. Again, I don't think that Ekitike joins Newcastle in the current situation. I think he would want more guarantees over first team football. I think the cost would be difficult to deal with for Newcastle. Crucially, those things are to be thought about down the line. This is more about finding the right option, and Ekitike is one name on this list. That's as far as it's gone. Again, lots of people jumping to conclusions, putting two and two together and making five. The Newcastle are already making moves towards Ekitike, so therefore it guarantees that Alexander Isak is out the door. That's not the case at all. Newcastle do ideally want to pair these two together if Ekitike signs. A lot has to happen for Ekitike to sign, and really basically all that's happened is Newcastle have drawn up a list with the player that they wanted 3 years ago right at the top of it, and I think that's not too surprising given how Newcastle have acted before. All of the other things are to be thought about in the scenario where Newcastle do actually get this deal over the line. That's a long, long way away, but crucially, in a world where Hugo Ekitike is a Newcastle United player, Alexander Isak would be as well, and that is very exciting. If you think about it in Champions League terms, that suddenly makes Newcastle competitive, because it's easy and it's very understandable. We all do it. We think about football as very empathetically. We think about what would a footballer do? Would a footballer want to join and play alongside Isak? All of these sorts of things. But that's not really Newcastle's concern. If they can convince Ekitike to do that, then they won't see it as a huge problem. They'll see it as a huge opportunity to play 60 games next season with two top quality strikers, because they do have big plans. Again, they would have to answer questions about the centre-back. We've all discussed about whether they should be looking more for a centre-back first, or where's the James Trafford deal at the moment. All of that sort of thing is right up in the air, but Hugo Ekitike could well become a main target this summer, and that is face value extremely exciting. From a Newcastle perspective, it really calms a lot of nerves, I think. Envisa, Ollie Watkins, they wouldn't be around for a long time. Any younger strikers would have to be unproven at a certain level. But if Newcastle were to go and get two brilliant strikers, suddenly in a very competitive market, you see Chelsea earning 120 million quid from winning the Club World Cup. They've already signed João Pedro and Liam Delap from under Newcastle's noses. They're already stronger. Tottenham are going to sign two brilliant creative midfielders with Premier League experience. Manchester United are going to be a bigger threat than last season, and then on top of that, Arsenal have improved, Liverpool have improved, Man City have improved as well. It's an incredibly competitive market at the top of the Premier League, so signing someone like Ekitike might make a lot more sense. Isak's got 3 years in his contract. Ekitike would come along and complement him extremely well stylistically and in terms of his versatility. The only reason it wouldn't work is for reasons that we assume are the case, and they very may well be, but those are for down the line. Let's see how this one plays out. I just want to talk about Anthony Elanga joining Newcastle finally. Some brilliant quotes, and he settled in extremely well, talking about how special the club is, talking about crucially how those players who he knows have helped him get involved. And one of those is, of course, Alexander Isak, who commented on his social media post with a bunch of love hearts about saying he's a Geordie as well. So that's a positive sign in terms of the link up between him. I do genuinely believe that Anthony Elanga joining does strengthen Newcastle's case with Alexander Isak. Obviously, he knows Sven Botman and Will Asula and a couple of others as well. So it feels like he's got a real chance to hit the ground running. He's not going to take time to adjust. He'll be in the squad, hopefully, for the trip to Celtic and on to Asia as well. The fact that, as we've discussed, he's barely ever injured is a real positive as well. I think Elanga's going to hit the ground running at Newcastle. Everything points towards that in a way that most players often don't. He feels like he's got the tangible skills to grow under Eddie Howe, even though there's an element of him not necessarily fitting the bill stylistically, because of he's coming from a team that's played more counter-attacking play to a team that wants to dominate the ball. ball, all of those things that we've discussed before. But it really feels like he's going to settle in, and I'm quite pleased with the way he adapted to it. He's clearly very excited to be at Newcastle. There are reasons why I think he will definitely hit the ground running at the club this season. And finally, I'm just going to touch on Jack Ross becoming Newcastle's new head of football strategy, which will be reporting to whoever is eventually the new sporting director when that appointment is made. This is a really interesting appointment because it's another body in the boardroom, another person who's available to help with negotiations. That'll help this summer, you would imagine. Jack Ross is a former Sunderland manager. He's come in and worked with the academy. He's been promoted to this role. Hopefully that's a real positive to at least give a little bit of stability between now and the appointment of the new CEO. Obviously, there's Ross Wilson and Jason Ato are in the sporting director race. There's obviously David Hopkinson who's in the race to be CEO as well. Hopefully we'll see a little bit more of a little bit more movement on those things in the next coming weeks. But Jack Ross being the head of football strategy is certainly something that's quite needed. Thanks so much for joining me on today's video. Like, share and subscribe. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about Hugo Ekitike genuinely being a potential target to play alongside Alexander Isak. As I said before, I don't think it'll happen, but all of the reasons are just semantic. All of the reasons are just assumptions. That is crucially not featuring in Newcastle's mindset. They just like the player. They've always liked the player. And if the deal is possible, as we've seen with them previously, they will go ahead and do as much as they can, and then they'll kind of think about how he'll fit in and what will happen down the line as well. Thanks so much for joining me. Welcome back to NUFC Transfer Daily for this week, and I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Cheers.